Friction is a customer experience killer. So today we're talking about how to run frictionless with the gentleman who wrote the book on it. Really, it's called Run Frictionless, and it offers a smart, systematic approach to creating and keeping customers. Anthony Konduras, welcome to the Customer Experience Podcast.
Thanks very much, Ethan, for having me here.
Yeah, I'm excited for the conversation. I really enjoyed the read, and I'm looking forward to getting into the 4 quadrants. So the conversation is going to be kind of organized the way that you organize the book, which I'm sure is the way you organize some of your consulting engagement. So let's get started properly. I always like to start with your thoughts around customer experience. When I say customer experience, what does that mean to you, Anthony?
Well, I used to think that customer experience was something that was very divorced from sales, that it was just something that was tacked onto the end. Like you sort of build a business and then everyone says, oh my God, we need a customer experience, right?
Yeah.
So they go on to sort of add it, right? Oh, we got it now. Good. I'm so glad we have that covered. And I used to think like that, like so many people. And then what we began to realize, our research team, was there's a strong correlation between sales and predictable revenue and customer experience. That is, the more improvement you can make in the way that you deliver a service or a product to a customer, the more likely they are to buy the product, and hence the reason why it can improve sales.
Awesome. I agree. It is obviously not a tack on. It needs to be designed from step one, and it's an integrated thing. And frankly, that's why we're doing the show, is to figure out how to make sure we can connect, leadership and strategy and decision-making at a high level with sales, marketing, CS, and all of the other teams and functions that are responsible for creating and delivering the experience, because the experience starts sometimes before you even have a customer. And so, as does your book. So before we get into it, when did you decide to organize your thoughts into Run Frictionless, and how did that go for you? What was the writing process like?
Oh, it was horrendous, because I had no production methodology, because I'm a first-time author. I've never written a book before. And so I told myself that, I can do this in 6 months. And no, it took longer.
Excellent. Good thinking is good writing, and good writing is good thinking. So I'm glad you went through the process. I found it highly digestible. Before we dive into each of them, can you just give us an overview of the 4 quadrants? And I'll just read them off really quickly. Q1 is who we serve. Q2 is what we serve. Q3 is who we are. And Q4 is how we serve. Can you just give an overview of those and kind of how they relate to one another?
Yeah, sure, Ethan. So the 4Qs framework is a decision-making framework, and in a sense, what I sort of realized is that sales is not the responsibility of salespeople. It's an organizational goal.
So let's get a little bit into Q1, who we serve. Again, it's the customer, it's persona, it's the ICP quadrant. Maybe provide 1 or 2 takeaways for people here.
Yeah, sure. I think that, one of the most interesting things about Quadrant 1 is how so few organizations, when I walk in to talk to them about what it is who they serve, they essentially just give me a very generic explanation. We just serve enterprise, or we serve small business owners. I've even heard CEOs say to me, we just serve anyone. Well, anyone who buys, okay?
Right.
And I laugh, because in the back of my mind is, I've never met this person called anyone, right? I've met Tom and Sally and Harry, but I've never met this person called anyone. It's this awesome person who just buys everything. It's amazing.
Or this person who introduces herself or himself as the enterprise.
One of the things that I think a lot of organizations can do is spend a lot more time, first of all, just trying to analyze and think about who they are serving, and not just talking about age and demographics and all that sort of stuff, but looking more at really discernible, significant data points, like perhaps their maturity or their sophistication, and looking at asymmetrical ways of measuring that maybe their competitors are not using.
It's really interesting. One of the things I really enjoyed about Q1 was the discipline of it. And I'm going to read you one of your a quote from your own chapter and maybe give me a response to it. And I've got one of these for each of the quadrants, by the way. The customer profile is a mutual understanding between the sales force and customer service about who is allowed to become a customer. So to your point, it's not anyone. We need to agree on who we're capable of serving well.
Yeah, because when you're scaling up and you're trying to free yourself of a sales role as a founder, if you start paying sales commissions to any profile that a salesperson brings you, well, of course, that's exactly what they'll do. They'll bring you anybody. And I started to see, like in some organizations where with certain customers, we would succeed. Like we'd have success for, say, transaction plus 60 days. And then many other profiles, in which case the success rate was very, very low. And what you start to figure out is that really the product, yes, technically could serve a lot of profiles, but really that there's only one or two that perhaps it's really optimized for to work well. Like one of the questions I always ask the salespeople is, the sales managers is like, look, if you serve this profile, whoever it might be, will you get a positive review? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to write something positive, but they might say something positive. And if you know in your heart that they're not going to give you a positive review, for goodness sakes, don't serve them.
Right. Just because you can close it doesn't mean that you should, because to your point here, if you can't see retention, potentially expansion, positive reviews, positive word of mouth, referrals, etc., you're probably doing a disservice to both you and to the customer.
Yeah, because there's someone out there right now who really needs your services. And if you're squandering your time serving customers who are never going to give you a positive review, who are going to hassle you for refunds, who are going to give you the wrong intelligence to drive quadrant 2, why are you doing this when there's customers right now who really need your organization and need your sales team? They're the ones you have to focus on.
Yeah. So who we serve obviously critically matters. Let's move to quadrant 2. And that is the what we serve, the product in the feature quadrant. Obviously, this one's closely related to Q1, but maybe share a couple big ideas in the second quadrant.
Yeah. So I think one of the big takeaways I've had in quadrant 2 is when I talk to CEOs and sales leaders in organizations, one of the things I ask them is, what are you selling? What do you serve to quadrant 1? And what I mean by that is, could you describe the features and the benefits? So I'll write this down. And then what I'll then do is perhaps do a friction test where I'll interrogate their online chat, their telephony people, the people who answer their email. And then I'll compare the results of what people are selling and telling me. And inevitably what we find is really inconsistent and wild differences day to day and from organization to organization about what we sell, even though I'm told 9 times out of 10, we know exactly what we're selling. We know what the product is.
Yeah, so that disconnect is obviously highly, highly problematic. One of my favorite things in this section was, especially, I think this is super relevant to software. I think most people can relate to it, but I'm sure it relates to a variety of other businesses as well. But I'll quote you and then kind of talk about some of the problems that fall out of it. And then I'd love your, what drove you to include this. And it is to avoid future sell because it introduces friction. It leads customer expectations. You wind up creating bespoke software. People can now defer the buying decision because you're promising something that's going to be built or delivered in the future. It makes the sale conditional in a way, like I'll buy it if or when, and it undervalues what you currently offer. It undervalues what you serve today.
Yeah, because so often the reason that the organization contacted you to start the conversation, they actually forget the benefits. And rather than the sales team actually going back and reiterating those really important features which are in the product right now, that reinforcing those and reminding the organization, this is why you should buy us, they'll essentially open up their order book and start to take down what needs to be in the product. So the customer's like, let's build this in real time together. And, like manufacturing companies got this right such a long time ago. Like they stamp everything. They talk about the limitations of their products in their every time that they send out information. They ship things with explaining to you not just what it does, but they say with unequivocally what it doesn't do, which is part of the education to the customer. And coming back to what you're saying before about Future Cell, I'm sure you've seen it yourself, Ethan, and you've done consulting before. It's where if you're in the early stages of a startup, it's not so bad because the consequences are very, very low. But imagine for a moment you're now a scale up. You're adding shareholders, customers, staff. People keep hearing and mixing sales messages with the vision of the company as opposed to what's coming in a couple of months. Pretty soon now, everybody believes what's in the future is what they're selling right now. And that's when these problems of these conditional moving targets begin, where customer says, hang on a moment, you promised that it would be there. It's not, I'm not going to buy it, go and build it.
Yeah. And so then you wind up with, sometimes future sell can happen because of a variety of problems. One of the worst though is when it's kind of made up on the spot in order to address a sale that's like imminent, right? That may or may not be the right person. And it's definitely not the product that you have today, is that you're promising on the spot something just to kind of keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I mean, legitimately though, what the discipline I try to introduce in organizations is say, look, the product people are the only ones who are allowed to write those product fact sheets. And then the marketing and the salespeople can then draw on that. And the roadmap, which details what's coming in, future quarters, I say to the organization, it should be absolutely locked away and not talked about, because the problem is that we suffer a bias where you might just hear around the water cooler a feature which is being released. The salespeople, whoever's listening to that, will interpret that as being in the present tense, not in the future, and will go out and sell it in the present tense.
Yeah, and to your point too, and then we'll move on. But to your point, it undervalues what you have today. It's so interesting. Like I've been at BombBomb for over 8.5 years, and so I'm deep in, and it's easy to take for granted some of the most basic features, benefits, opportunities, use cases that people are getting massive value out of, and you just stay focused on what's new, what's hot, what's fun to talk about, what's this thing we've been thinking about or planning for months or for years, and now it's finally about to come to pass. And so there's this constant future orientation and an undervaluing, even internally, of how you can benefit people.
Yeah, no, good point. And I suppose it's really a discipline, if anything. But one of the things I talk about in the book is just sell what's in the warehouse, And I try to bring it back to the way manufacturing companies say. They're really brutal, they're like, listen, man, it's in black and it's in red. You want it or not?
Right.
And sometimes I just wish people selling software could be as brutal. And actually, they probably would get the order just by being so confident.
Q3 in particular is really, really interesting. It's who we are, kind of the brand quadrant. And so share maybe the top 2 or 3 things that you really find to be problematic or exciting or interesting as you're consulting people around the themes in who we are.
Right. So I think that a lot of organizations today have realized that customers buy rationally from quadrant 1 out of quadrant 2, hence a quadrant 1, quadrant 2 fit. So they'll look at the features, they'll look at the limitations, they think about the workarounds, and they compare different vendors, and they try to come to a rational decision, right? Now, here's an interesting play though. Quadrant 3 is about who we are. In particular, one of the levels that it operates on is around this idea of beliefs, which is based on cultural identity. So our team did a lot of understanding about cultural identification and the way in which we operate as tribes and the sense of belonging that we have, right? Here's something interesting. Some of the research that we've done suggests that 70% of buying decisions is not out of quadrant 2, but out of quadrant 3. So quadrant 3, you know, if you strike a quadrant 1, quadrant 3 fit, if you hear this from a customer, okay? Goodness, I've been telling people this for years. Finally, somebody has built the product that I've been talking about. Thank you so much for listening to me.
It's a good sign. So 70% of buying decisions are made out of quadrant 3, which is this idea of shared belief. So I'm going to read one of my favorite sections in the book. Sharing beliefs sets in motion a set of irrational buying forces that are near impossible for a competitor to mimic. The irrational buying force is so strong that even when sales, product, and operations people are screwing up, customers keep buying because they believe in the brand. I love this idea, two ideas in particular, and they're obviously interrelated.
Right.
This shared belief, like the way we see the world as a team and as a company, is the same way that our customers see the world potentially. And so this is this kind of shared belief in this identity piece. And then this irrational buying force, which is what I think you were talking about in that setup, which is, it's not a Q1 or a Q2 decision. It's not this rational decision, but there are irrational buying forces that I think speaks to, I guess, at a high level, kind of the dual theory of the mind, the idea that we make our decisions emotionally and then we back ourselves up rationally. And so talk a little bit about this interplay of irrational buying forces and shared beliefs, and maybe even, to that second line of that I quoted there, the grace that we're given by our customers, even when we're screwing up because they believe.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ethan. Quadrants 1 and 2 are not very defensible. Like I've had arguments with CEOs about FAQs. They don't want to put up FAQs because they know that competitors will reverse engineer back out of FAQs and terms and conditions to figure out even how the product was built. We know quadrant 2 is not defensible, and yet so much emphasis is put on product. Like when people are talking about, I want to increase my price, they say, just add more features, right? Of course, it's not the case because the customer doesn't know the product is any better because they haven't bought the product yet. And what retailers taught us a long time ago, they said, look, all you need to do is just emphasize a little bit more around your packaging, which happens to be a buying cue to quadrant 2. So quadrant 3 is a buying cue to the quality that's coming in quadrant 2. And then this concept of shared beliefs is rather interesting. We saw a really recent example. Do you remember the launch of the Tesla truck?
Yes.
And what happened during the product launch, right?
Right. The shattered window.
So you could say, well, and in fact, the automotive journalists did. They said, hey, bad product day, bad quadrant 2 day. This is an example of one of these startups with bad products. We really shouldn't be listening to them. And yet, despite that, at the close of business the following day, Tesla posted a press release saying they received over 100,000 orders of the truck. And I just watched this video and saying this is going to be not a demonstration of a bad product day, but what it means to have a shared belief with a customer. They weren't buying out of quadrant 2. They completely forgave him. They're like, you know what, man, we get all that. Like, because every company has a bad product day. The difference is, will they crucify you or will they forgive you?
Yeah. And so that it speaks again to that irrationality. And I also like that you started with something that I had overlooked or failed to mention, which is this is the defensible part of the business. How you do this and how you deliver your product or service, which is, for me, partly code language for the experience, right? Although this quadrant is more about the beliefs that underlie it, but how you go to market is the defensible aspect of it, because, any of your features and whatever can be knocked off by anyone.
Right. And you're right. There is definitely a quadrant 3, quadrant 4 fit, which we can get to in a moment. But let's not underestimate how hard it is to achieve a belief. Look, Ethan, you and I can have a belief that no one else shares. And we call crazy people and they lock us up, right? We're delivered to the asylum and then that's where we stay there. But there are other people who resonate, right, and become leaders. And then because people are listening to them and go, hey, man, I get this. I know what you're saying. I feel the same way about this. I'm going to join. We're going to have a quadrant 1, quadrant 3 fit here. And if you can get that kind of fit going in your organization, it's so difficult to mimic because it's inside out. You see, you have to hire the same people who believe in the same thing, because otherwise, as soon as the customer pierces your organization and gets past the marketing veneer and dig into your business, they're going to find those people who don't believe, and then they're going to get you, Ethan. They're going to say, hang on, you sold me on a belief and you're the only guy in the company that believes it and the rest of you don't. And I feel really deceived.
Yeah, in the sad or scary or potentially harmful aspect of that is that you might not even say that consciously as a customer. You just feel this disconnect,
Yeah.
and you feel this distrust, and you can't necessarily articulate it, but you're like, this isn't what I thought this was. These people aren't who I thought they were. This isn't what I was expecting or hoping for. And you might not even say those things consciously. You just kind of like,
Yeah.
from the company perspective, you swipe the credit card once and then you just kind of disappear.
Yeah, because it's not from quadrant 2. They can't put their finger on it. They can't say it was a feature or you lied about a limitation. It's really hard. You're quite right. You probably wouldn't even see it in a feedback form, somebody replying back about. They just wouldn't know how to articulate this, but boy, do they feel it in their heart.
Right. And it's, and again, this is the dark side of the irrational buying force. This is the irrational quitting force or similar, whatever. It's the flip side of that. So I actually started to bleed into Q4 there with the way I teed up that section there. Q4 is how we serve. It really is the customer experience quadrant. So what are a couple things folks should take away from how we serve?
Yeah. So I think that, first of all, let's make sure we have the definitive number of interactions that are required to create a customer. So our research showed us that if you're serving small business owners, you're talking between sort of 10 to 15 interactions. And if you're serving decision makers from enterprise companies, you're supporting 25 upwards of, say, 50 interactions. And now what you can really start to do when you do a quadrant 1, quadrant 4 fit is you can start to really look at the cost to serve, because you can say, well, that's a $50 interaction, it's a 25 US interaction. Start adding them up and you start to see really what it costs to serve that customer. So that's, I think, probably one takeaway. But Ethan, here's another one, that kind of data point that I think that a lot of the readers, the listeners today, perhaps not tracking in quadrant 1 that they ought to be. And I think we'll probably come to it in a moment. That's that one called customer expiry. Did you want me to elaborate on that, or did you want to talk about your experience around that?
No. I'll take your go at customer expiry.
So it's a really interesting data point, and let me explain how we came about it, how we fumbled upon it. So it happened in 2015. We were asked by a CEO of a SaaS startup to find out why is it that our prospects are walking away from our pipeline to our competitors. So what we looked at was about 6 months worth of data. And we got our research team to call these individuals to say, okay, what happened during the prospecting stage? Now, here's an interesting figure. 50% of them didn't buy anything. And yet we confirmed that they are legitimate buyers by checking their profiles on LinkedIn. So we go back to the CEO and said, well, I don't know if it's a competitive problem because 50% did nothing. They never bought. And he said, well, could you go and find out why? And we did. And so we probed deeper, did some telephony surveys. Turns out these customers actually think the whole industry suck. They think there's so much friction in order for them to make buying decisions. They would rather suck eggs, continue using Excel, and never hear about these organizations again. And we were able to figure out a number just by the questions that we asked them. And it turns out that this group had assigned, consciously or unconsciously, between 14 to 18 days in which they had to make a buying decision in their organization. So when we went back to the CEO, we said, well, do you know, when you decide to redesign quadrant 4, actually, you don't need to worry about your competitors. You just focus on one data point called customer expiry. And for goodness sakes, develop a customer experience that can be delivered in 14 days, and you'll probably make a lot of money.
Interesting. So just go a little bit more at this 14 to 18 days. What needs to happen in that window?
Okay, so the number really will change from, like whoever's listening to
Sure.
our podcast, right? It's going to be different. We've seen buying decisions happen as short as 7 minutes all the way to 6 months, right? And it just happens to be that example was 14 days. That is the early, the middle, and the end game all has to be closed out. It doesn't mean rushing or forcing or ramming the customer, but those set of interactions, those 15 interactions or those 25 interactions, all still need to be legitimately delivered within 14 to 15 or 18 days. So that means you need to start getting pretty creative about how you serve those interactions. What will be automated? What will be human? What are going to be the different objectives? Because you better make sure that every interaction actually does something, because there's no time for wastage here or having a little conversation on the side of the road. Let's have a little pep talk, shall we, about your dog and just catch up on that. No, there's no time for that, because they've got 14 days and they're going to run away. They're not going to buy from anybody.
So interesting that that there's this, essentially the clock is running.
Yeah, it's a race, as you put it to me earlier.
Yeah,
it really is. It really is a race. It's the best way to think about it.
Well, and that's the quote that I pulled out of Q4, which is think about achieving the customer's goal as a race. And the reason I like that so much is that it speaks to a theme that I've been thinking about and talking about and hearing more. Like the more you pay attention to something, the more often you see it. And it's this idea of owning the customer's outcome, not just as like a desired outcome delivered via an appropriate experience, but really owning the customer's metrics as if they're your own and really becoming a partner in their success. And then of course there's the race component on top of that, and do it within the expiry window.
Yeah. I remember talking to a bunch of payments companies in Southeast Asia, and they thought the customer's goal or the customer's outcome was to pass the KYC or the verification process and open up an account to do a cross-border payment. After we got through talking to them, customers said, actually, we don't care about that. We want to make a transfer today. That's my goal. So if I say that I've got 14 days to make a buying decision, right? It's not necessarily the goal that you think. It could be something way more elaborate, or the outcome could be a different kind of metric than we first thought it was.
Yeah, it's not the acquisition of the product or the service itself in the transaction. It's obviously, that is one of your necessary checkpoints on the route to, the whatever is sought, the customer's goal.
Yeah.
Any other high level observations here about the quadrants? Obviously, it sounds like you developed them as a consequence of organizing some of your thoughts and your experience for the benefit of, again, we should have mentioned the subtitle is that it's freeing a founder from a sales role, but you also did a nice job in the book of speaking to early stage and, more developed businesses, and at the end of each chapter with the important takeaways. Is there anything we didn't cover here that you find is either very interesting or provocative or relevant or necessary for the types of companies that you're working with?
Yeah. Well, when I wrote the 4 Qs, one of my, criticisms of frameworks is how stupid they make the reader. They're like project management tools, assess, do it, results. Oh, wow. That's a framework. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's way too simplistic, and it doesn't allow any creativity. So the 4 Qs is rather different. For instance, Ethan, we could start in quadrant 2 to reduce friction, as opposed to moving. You don't have to move sequentially from 1, 2, 3, or 4. A lot of people start in 3. Like around beliefs, So first of all, there's no starting position. And the thing that I also like about it is it's a little bit like a woodworking project. Now, let's just say we're building a table together. Well, to get the various components to fit, sometimes you need to shave off a little bit here and saw a bit more of that piece. In the sense you're getting a fit. And Aitchison would called, he sort of used this word product market fit. You can use the quadrants the same way. For example, we talked about quadrant 3, quadrant 4 fit. So you develop the belief, then you wrap those words and pictures from quadrant 3 around each of those interactions which you design in quadrant 4. But here's another interesting play. What about a quadrant 1, 2, 4 fit? So a lot of times salespeople don't know what to sell next. So I think one of the plays of quadrant 4 is to intelligently sell the next product from quadrant 2 to the right person in quadrant 1, hence a quadrant 1, quadrant 2, 4 fit.
Restate that one more slowly.
Yeah, sure. So if we're mapping quadrants 1, 2, and 4, well, I think one of the really important aspects today of a lot of organizations, not so much startups, bigger companies, they've got lots of products. And what a lot of their salespeople are struggling with is, what do I sell next? Or what do I even sell first? So I think that one of the goals of quadrant 4 is to sell the next product out of quadrant 2 to the right customer profile in quadrant 1. See the fit that you're looking for. So you can try and get a fit of 1 to 4 by saying, well, we can design, individual, very unique customer experiences for each of our profiles in quadrant 1. A lot of us are doing that now. We're realizing that you can't have generic experiences in quadrant 4 anymore. But also we can start to intelligently sell product from quadrant 2 by applying the same theory.
Really good. So do you, when you engage with a company, do you tend to lead with this book so that you have the same language to start with? Or does it kind of come around?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the feedback that I've been given by the users, the readers of the book, is it creates, if anything, it creates a common vocabulary where it doesn't really matter whether you're the product guy, product girl, the CEO, or somebody who's delivering the CX in quadrant 4. It's really easy for guys and girls to get together and make a decision. So I like to not make the book a barrier. I don't want to introduce friction into my own sales process. So what I do is I give them like a 1 hour quick overview, teach them the power of the 4 Qs, and just get them using the vocabulary. And it seems like they start using it in their organizations, like the line managers, and pretty soon the people within the various functions of the group start using the same words, which makes it easier then to make the changes that we need to later.
Yeah, really good. So if you are listening to this episode and you've enjoyed it, of course, I recommend Run Frictionless from Anthony. It's a really good read. And I'll also recommend 2 other episodes of this show. Episode 25 with Brian Gilman, who is the Vice President of Solutions Marketing at Vonage. That episode is called Why Friction is a Customer Experience Killer. And it's a lot about solutions marketing. And then episode 6 with my longtime friend, team member, co-author on Rehumanize Your Business, and he is the CMO at BombBomb. That episode is with Steve Passanelli, and we titled it Connecting with Customers by Exploring a Shared Belief. We had a shared belief conversation back on episode 6, and I think this is going to be episode 70 something.